going to transition back to the Gonzaga Bulldogs. And with a quick review of what we saw last year. So this was a team that went 27-8, 14-2 in the WCC, which was second, 9th straight Sweet 16. And this was a roller coaster of a season because a lot of people thought this was a down year for the Zags. And this was a team that lost Alex Tui late in the summer as he decided to stay in Australia. They lost Steele Venters in that last week before the season started to an ACL tear. Depth became a problem, especially at the guard position as they entered the season. And as the non-conference started, they were picking up good wins, but they weren't picking up the great win. They beat Syracuse in the Maui Invitational. They beat UCLA, which didn't age well. They beat USC, which didn't age well. They lost to UConn. They lost to San Diego State. They lost to Purdue. Almost all three of those could be understandable. But they lost to Washington too, which seemed so out of left field that it almost threw everyone into a panic of what is happening to this Gonzaga team. They entered WCC play. They started to play a little bit better, but they hadn't really played the tougher part of the WCC schedule yet. And they were on the ropes against USF. They were able to pull that out. But then they lost to Santa Clara. And it really started to, by one, yes, like it was only by one, but at that point, it almost seemed for many that the sky was falling. This was a team that was only 7 players deep. There was a lot of pressure being put on players who were not quite ready for that stage. There were maybe some unfair expectations being placed on those guys, and like Dusty Stromer kind of first and foremost on that list of guys who you could see the talent, but he was being thrust into a role that wasn't supposed to be his last season. And then the talk started, like, could this be the team that wouldn't make the NCAA tournament? Is this the team that was going to break the streak? And then they won at Kentucky in the middle of February. Ben Gray got inserted into the starting lineup. And that's when it seemed like everything changed. Mind you, and that started a stretch where they went 8. They were 8-2 in WCC play when that Kentucky game happened. So don't want to like oversell the whole idea that like, oh, they lost the Kentucky win really was like a complete turnaround point. They were still playing well. They were still doing all the things, but they weren't winning them in the fashion that we're so used to seeing Gonzaga teams win. They weren't beating all the teams we were used to seeing Gonzaga beat. They had lost to St. Mary's once in the regular season. They didn't win the WCC regular season title. They lost to St. Mary's in the WCC championship game. But all that said, they earned a 5 seed in the NCAA tournament. They beat McNeese, who everyone was picking as the 5-12 upset. They beat Kansas, a beat-up, battered Kansas team. They reached their 9th straight Sweet 16 before they finally lost to Zach Edey's Purdue team again. So what was considered a, quote, down year, they ended up right back where we're used to seeing them by the end. They were in the Sweet 16. 9 straight years. And that accomplishment alone, you cannot minimize how difficult that is. No one else is doing that. There's very few who have even done. I think I need to go back to see if anyone's actually ever had that long of a streak of reaching the Sweet 16. This is unique. What they are accomplishing right now in this run is special. And going into this year, I think I'd be very hard pressed to not think that they're going to be right back in that second weekend and reach their 10th straight Sweet 16 and then advance even further. So as we know going into this year, high expectations, even though you do lose Anton Watson, who is one of, if not the best defender in Gonzaga history. 4 of the 5 starters come back. Graham Ike, Ryan Nembhard, Nolan Hickman, Ben Gray. All of them return. 3 of you have, and 3 of them were picked to be on the all WCC preseason team. Ike, Nembhard, Hickman are all on that squad. You bring back Braden Huff, one of the better young players that Gonzaga has. Like Braden Huff, was great off the bench in a lot of moments, great offensively, still a work in progress on the defensive end, but he got better as the season went along. Dusty Stromer comes back, and he's going to be slotted into a role that I think is going to be a little bit more comfortable for him going into this season. He's not going to be asked to do nearly as much as he was a year ago. So you have that core group of 6 returners who played significant minutes a year ago. But now I'm going to add. Gonzaga added Michael Ajayi who transferred over from Pepperdine. I think we were still in the NCAA tournament when that was announced. I think I was still in Spokane when it was announced. I hadn't even gotten out of the first round of the tournament by the time his name was called to be joining Gonzaga. This was a guy who led the WCC in scoring a year ago at 19 a game. This was someone who was second in rebounding at 9.9 a game. This is someone who shoots it well, is going to be a good wing player for this squad, and someone who gives them another offensive option to a team that already has a ton of them. You bring in the Arkansas transfer Khalif Battle, who has been one of the more talked about transfers coming in this offseason, because this is someone who is, again, you talk about someone who can score. This is another person who gets buckets. Last season, he was averaging 14.8 points in 25, just short of 25 minutes a game. But in those last 7 games for the Razorbacks, he was averaging 29 points a game, 6 rebounds a game. This is someone who just gets points. He was 33rd in the NCAA in free throw attempts last year. He scored 20 plus points 12 times last season. So this is going to be someone who we'll see about what his role is actually going to be. Initially, I think many people thought 6-man, first off the bench. I don't know if I want to read too much into the fact that he started in the exhibition game instead of Nolan Hickman, but he is, no matter what scenario it is, he's going to provide that extra guard, that extra relief, so that it takes some of the pressure off of Nolan Hickman, Ryan Nembhard, because those two played a ton of minutes last season. Hickman led the WC. The two of those were both averaging 35 minutes a game, and I know I had concern over their durability over the course of the season because they were playing heavy, stressful minutes in a lot of those contests. And having someone like Khalif Battle in there, having someone like Michael Ajayi in there is going to relieve some of that for those two guys. So those two being huge pickups in and of themselves. Now, one that I think is a piece that talk about offense. Well, you still need to address the defense, because that was something that Gonzaga wasn't the best at a year ago. And the early KenPom numbers don't lend them to think that they're going to be, they're not a bad defensive team, but they're not a great defensive team. I think they had him at 46 in the defensive KenPom number for the preseason. But you needed some defense. Bottom line, you needed someone who is also going to be kind of a lockdown defender, someone who's looked at as being a problem on the defensive end of the floor. And that was what Emmanuel Innocenti brought in from Tarleton State. Coming in as a sophomore, he was all defensive team on the all freshman squad a year ago. He ranked fourth in the league amongst all freshmen in the nation. Sorry, I looked at this stat wrong. Amongst all freshmen in the nation, he ranked fourth in defensive rebounds per game, eighth in steals, ninth in overall rebounds. This is someone who is going to give them that wrinkle that they really don't have anywhere else. And I think something to be said about someone like that. You need someone who's going to be a little bit more of a glue guy, much more like a Ben Gregg and what he has been over the course of his time at Gonzaga. You need someone who's going to do a lot of the dirty work. You need someone who's going to step in to do those things. And he is someone who can step in to do those things, even if it's in short spurts or in limited minutes or whatnot throughout the course of a game. Because this team, you look at up and down, like there's offense everywhere. Graham Ike, someone who's capable of scoring 20 a game. Ryan Hemart is capable of scoring 20 a game. Ajayi is capable of scoring 20 a game. Battle is capable of doing it. Nolan Hickman could give you 15 plus a game. You put these guys in the right situation, they're all capable of giving you big outings, which is going to make it so difficult to guard this team because you never know where it's going to come from. Again, and then Ben Gregg, Braden Huff, Dusty Stromer, and Sente can just almost fill in the gaps on that front and do a lot of the little things that they need the team to do. Now, I will say that the depth overall doesn't seem to be much of a problem. They have a lot of interchangeable pieces. Ajayi can play multiple positions. Battle can play multiple positions. Sente can play multiple positions. Stromer can play multiple positions. The one I think that's, if there is a concern, it is the depth at the center spot. And because Graham Ike, as we even saw last year, did have the tendency to get into foul trouble, which forced Braden Huff into more minutes, which forced him into some situations where he was taken advantage of on the defensive end. And getting to him, again, like it's not a bad thing because, again, like he's going to also give you something on the offensive side of the ball. So it's not like you lose a ton on that side. But what you are doing is you're putting more pressure on the fact that Ike may not always. No, when Ike's in, like he's one of the best big men in the country. When he's in, if he can stay on the floor, that helps Gonzaga really stretch out games and really kind of make sure that their depth is at that spot, at that position, isn't as glaring. But if he gets into foul trouble and then you have to go to Braden Huff, he also could potentially get into foul trouble, even again, using that USC game as an example of what could happen. Both of them got into foul trouble, and that is a challenge that Gonzaga is going to have to face and deal with as they face maybe some larger teams over the course of the non-conference and then also throughout conference play, because look at, especially staring at St. Mary's, Santa Clara, Washington State, and even USF to an extent, you have some big teams that you're going to have to deal with, and this is something that if I'm going to point at something that Gonzaga might have a weakness in, that is going to be it going into this season. Now, thinking about this non-conference, Gonzaga going into this year, was obviously ranked top 10 in number of polls. I think it was like number 7 in the AP, number 6 in the coaches, and it's earned, it's warranted. And their non-conference kind of matches it. Their non-conference, they're going to start out with Baylor on Monday night at Spokane Arena. They have Arizona State. They're going to be at San Diego State. They head to the Battle for Atlantis, where they'll see West Virginia. Then they'll play either Indiana or Louisville. They have Kentucky for the Battle in Seattle. They're going to be playing UConn at Madison Square Garden. They're going to be playing UCLA at the Intuit Dome. There was a ton of opportunity for this Gonzaga team in the non-conference to really kind of take a hold of even a top 5 ranking if they are able to get the right wins and really kind of establish themselves as that team going into conference play. Because I do think going into the conference play, I think there is a separation between them and everybody else. Again, while I do think that St. Mary's is still going to be in the mix, St. Mary's is still a tournament team. The additions that Gonzaga made, I think, makes it that much more challenging to try to limit them and what they're going to do. Even St. Mary's, as good as they are defensively, and they're still going to be one of the better defensive teams in the country, this is the number of weapons that Gonzaga has just makes it difficult. And yeah, sure, they can't have them all out on the floor at the same time. I mean, you can't have 7, 8 guys who all could shoot 40% from 3 on the floor at once. But they're going to spread you out. They're going to make it difficult. And honestly, it does feel like at times like it might be better off for Gonzaga to maybe have the 2 big guys off the floor, at least in small spurts, to really stretch teams out so that they can use their speed and their athleticism and that versatility to its fullest potential. Not to say that I think it's going to happen, but I think that would be an interesting thing to see of like, hey, run out a group out there that where maybe Ajayi is the center and you roll with, or even Ben Gregg being the center, like just thinking about Gregg, Ajayi, Battle, Hickman, and Nembhard out there at the same time. That is a group that's just going to run, and would be really fun to watch and see what that group is able to do together in small spurts. But their non-conference sets themselves up very well for what could be a run to the Final Four, a run back to the national title game. We have seen this in 4-wave spurts. They got to the title game in 2017. They got to the title game in 2021. 4 years later, 2025, this coming March Madness, this coming tournament, can they get back to where they were, and can they finish the job that has eluded them for so long throughout the course of this run that Gonzaga has had under Mark Few? Now, I think that this is a Gonzaga team that is going to win the WCC. I don't think that means necessarily that they're going to have a clean slate. I think that they could end up dropping one of those games to either to St. Mary's, to Santa Clara, or even to, say, Washington State. I think it's possible for that to happen, as that is going to start to become a budding rivalry, as they are going to move together to the Pac-12 as well. And also, I'm just staring at that last 4 games for Gonzaga going into the WCC tournament, where they're going to have 3 of their last 4 on the road, and it's at Washington State, then they're home for St. Mary's, then at Santa Clara, at USF. So it's very similar to the stretch that they had last season at the very end, a stretch in which they did actually clean sweep the St. Mary's, Santa Clara, and USF. But it's a stretch in which they were also playing at their best. I think that was for Gonzaga. They started playing well toward the end of the season. They were starting to play well into February. They started to play well into March, and that was when they really hit their stride. Now, I think a large part of that was because they were still trying to figure out that rotation and what that was going to look like. And at least going into this year, that seems much more solidified, that they can hit the ground running going into this year, and they're going to be able to play better and play well against a lot of those good teams right away, where I just don't think they're ready to do that in November, December a year ago, and they'll be much more prepared and ready for it this year. So for this Gonzaga team, bottom line, I think they are the favorite to win the WCC regular season title. I think they are at the very least back to the Sweet 16 for the 10th straight year. But after that, it's always tough because expectations are difficult. Expectations can get away from how difficult this is, because this Gonzaga squad as good as it is, all it takes is one bad game for it to all end in March. And we've seen it to any number of great teams in March that lose somehow early in the tournament, earlier than we all thought they would. And so going into this year, I don't want to say like the expectation should be Final Four. The expectation should be X, Y, or Z. I think that they are capable of getting back to the title game. I think they are capable of reaching the second weekend. I think that's almost like the bottom line. If there is an expectation, that's my bottom line expectation. Back to the Sweet 16. After that, all bets are off because of matchups, because of March. Things happen in that month that you wouldn't anticipate happening at any other time. So this Gonzaga squad looks the part. It is going to play the part and is going to be one of the tougher outs once we get to March Madness and to the NCAA tournament.